Hi, you're watching Reddit Shikstore, and if you're looking for a story that doesn't start with butterflies in your stomach and a happy ending, you've come to the right place. My name is Alexei. I'm 43. An architect. I've been building houses for other families for 2 decades. I built my own family at 28, when I married Irina. Back then, it seemed like forever. The suspicions came unnoticed, like the first wrinkles. At first, I denied them, then I started counting. She began wearing different perfume to work. Not the one I gave her for her birthday, but something light, almost imperceptible. A gift from colleagues, a sample, she said when I asked. Then came the late meetings. On Wednesdays. Always on Wednesdays. I knew the schedule of her boutique by heart. They closed at 8, but she'd come home at 10, with damp hair as if fresh from the shower. Stopped by the gym after work, she'd say, avoiding my gaze. But her sports bag remained untouched in the hallway all those days. I started watching. Not out of malice, out of despair. One Wednesday, I canceled a meeting, took a taxi, and went to her work. I saw her leaving not alone. With him. Dmitry, the owner of the neighboring jewelry store. I'd seen him a couple of times at general events at the mall. Tall, graying, with an expensive watch. He placed his hand on the small of her back, lightly, familiarly. That gesture told me more than 1,000 words. They got into his black Mercedes. I let the car pull away and told the taxi driver to follow them. We drove for 20 minutes. They turned towards the Sigma Hotel, 4 stars, not the most lavish, but secluded enough. I stood on the opposite side of the street, watching them disappear behind the glass doors. My heart didn't race, it seemed to freeze, turning into a lump of ice somewhere in my chest. I didn't follow them. I didn't knock on the hotel room door. I returned home, sat on our sofa, bought 7 years ago when we decided to start a new life after the crisis, and looked at the photograph above the fireplace. Us in Crimea, laughing. It seemed that laughter still echoed in the walls. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned. I knew Dmitry wasn't just a lover. He was part of the mall's business community. His jewelry store was a showcase of success. But I, an architect, knew something about foundations. And that even the most beautiful facades can hide cracks. I started small. Taking advantage of Irina leaving her laptop unlocked when she ran for coffee in the mornings. Her passwords were always simple, birthdates, pet names. Within a few days, I had access to her correspondence. It was methodical. I didn't weep over their words. I analyzed. They discussed not just meetings, but business. Dmitry complained about rent, about pressure from the management company. Irina advised him on how to present merchandise. She shared details of our life, my habits. Reading it was like watching an autopsy of my own body without anesthesia. I learned the main thing. Dmitry had problems with the tax authorities. He quietly mentioned discrepancies, an audit. His business was beautiful, but fragile. I had worked on a project, the mall's reconstruction 5 years ago. I designed their boutique too. I had connections left, blueprints, an understanding of the systems. And most importantly, I knew Artem, the engineer who maintained the security systems for the entire mall. We sometimes drank together, complained about life. One evening over a glass of cognac, I cautiously asked. Listen, if someone wanted to know more about a neighboring business. For example, the jewelers. Is that even possible? Artem chuckled. Cameras are tricky, the data is stored. But the access logs who enters, when? Especially after closing. That can be checked. For, say, checking employee loyalty. He gave me a knowing look. What, has your wife taken a liking to the neighbor? I pretended to be embarrassed. Just thinking out loud. A week later, I had a printout. Dmitry regularly entered his store in the evenings, after official closing. Sometimes alone, sometimes with a guest. The log showed Irina's unique passcode entering his store during those very evening hours. Evidence. Cold, digital, indisputable. The next step was the hardest. I found Dmitry's wife, Elena. She had an Instagram, a perfect life. Charity, travel, smiles at gallery openings. I created an anonymous email. I didn't make accusations. I simply sent her the access logs with the dates and times highlighted. And a short note. Your husband often works late. On July 24th at 9:30 p.m. he had an assistant. Passcode 4571. This is an employee of the Silk Road Boutique, Irina. Perhaps you should check what they do after closing. I knew Elena wasn't just a wife. She was a co-owner. Her father provided the initial capital. She had access to all the finances and a reason to be ruthless. There was no reply. But 3 days later, Irina came home agitated. Can you imagine, Dmitry had a huge fight with his wife. She launched an inspection, found some discrepancies in the documents. He's on pins and needles now. I made a sympathetic face. Poor Dmitry. And what does that have to do with you? She looked away. Nothing, I'm just worried about a colleague. The fire was lit. I waited. Elena had clearly started her war. Strange things began happening at Irina's boutique. Delayed shipments, sudden inspections from the mall management. Dmitry, as I learned from the intercepted correspondence, was torn between his mistress and his furious wife, who had started a financial audit. It was time for the main strike. I knew from their chats that Dmitry kept a reserve fund, unaccounted cash for flexible expenses. He boasted the hiding spot was reliable, in the wall, behind the old safe. Irina joked. What if there's a fire? I hired a drama student. Gave him instructions and a courier uniform. One evening, when Dmitry was alone in the store, the logs helped, this courier delivered a pizza he hadn't ordered. While a confused Dmitry was dealing with the delivery, the student, walking past, accidentally bumped into the fire alarm near the back wall. The fire alarm for the entire mall went off. Emergency services and the police were automatically called. By protocol, during such an alert, all premises are opened for inspection. Dmitry, trying to prevent his haul from being checked, looked suspicious. When the firefighters forced the door open, he was shouting that he'd lost the key, and the police began their inspection. They quickly found the hiding place. Not because they were looking, but because one of the officers, leaning against the wall, noticed an irregularity. They tapped, a hollow space. Cash, jewelry without documentation, a flash drive with double bookkeeping. Everything as I'd suspected. He was led away in handcuffs in front of the entire mall's night shift. There were about 30 witnesses. Irina found out the next morning. She was hysterical. He's been arrested. They searched his place, he's facing charges. His business is shut down. I calmly brewed coffee. Seems your colleague wasn't as clean as he appeared. She looked at me, and suddenly something new flashed in her eyes, suspicion. Alexei, this is too strange. The fire alarm, you worked on the systems for that mall. I looked up at her. For the first time in all these months, I looked at her not as a victim or a betrayer, but as an equal opponent. And? You think I set it up? Why would I? She didn't answer. But the connection between us, already worn thin, seemed to snap. A week later, an official notice arrived. Irina's boutique was losing its spot in the mall due to a concept review. Elena, using her influence, was clearing the field. Irina was left without a job, without a lover, with a tarnished reputation in their small professional circle. She tried to rebuild her life. Looked for a new job, but the market is small. Dmitry got a suspended sentence, a hefty fine, lost his business and his wife. Elena filed for divorce, taking most of the assets. And we continued living in the same house. Dead silence in the evenings. Separate bedrooms. One night she came to me. Stood in the doorway in her old robe, the one I'd given her once. "I know it was you," she said quietly. "I can't prove it. But I know. I didn't deny it. And I know about Wednesdays. About the hotel. About the perfume I didn't give you." We looked at each other, two chess players after the end of a game where not a single piece remained on the board. "Why?" she asked, and her voice held not accusation, but exhaustion. "To restore the balance," I replied. "You destroyed our world. I destroyed yours. Now we're even." She nodded, as if this was the only logical conclusion, and left. We divorced 6 months later. Without scandals, almost like a business transaction. She moved to another city. I stayed in the house I built for a family. Sometimes in the evenings, I go to the window and look at the empty garden. I won my war. Meticulously planned, brilliantly executed. But victory, it turns out, doesn't smell of triumph. It smells of dust, loneliness, and a silence that rings in your ears, reminding you that vengeance is a house where it's impossible to live once the construction is complete. You remain in it alone, among perfectly straight walls, and understand that you built it not for living, but to wall yourself up inside.